Our next session is entitled Holistic Supports for Community College Students, a randomized control trial of 1 million degrees. So 1 million degrees is a student-supported organization, a student support organization offering community college students, including city college students, coaching, mentoring, professional development, and financial support. The Inclusive Economy Lab's recent study of 1 million degrees showed that students who apply to OMD before they arrive on campus and participate in the program can greatly increase college enrollment, persistence, and degree attainment. With results from the study in hand, city colleges in 1 million degrees recently announced they would significantly scale up their work together. And today we will hear both about the study and the expansion. Before welcoming everyone up, I know I see the panelists like eager to get on stage. I do want to thank a few people. There are several organizations, some who have joined us today, who made the OMD CCC expansion possible. First, we want to thank the funders who made the RCT possible over a number of years, including the Spencer Foundation, the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, the Crankstart Foundation, and Arnold Ventures. And then, City Colleges would also like to thank the Pritzker Foundation and a special acknowledgement to Penny Pritzker for being the lead sponsor of the expansion of the OMD CCC partnership that was again recently announced this past November. Other funders supporting that expansion also include the Finnegan Family Foundation and JP Morgan Chase. And it's also a special moment for my organization, A Better Chicago. We have began investing in 1 million degrees in 2013 when they only served 121 students at the time. And we have invested with them for the past decade, helping them grow, helping support the RCT, and most recently committed to another $1 million for this expansion. So I am thrilled to have this panel come up and be a small part of this. And then I would like to formally introduce Marianne Bertrand, Faculty Director of the University of Chicago Inclusive Economy Lab, who will lead this panel. Thank you.
This is working. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. So, yes, my name is Marianne Bertrand. I'm a faculty member at the University of Chicago. I'm an economist by training. I'm interested in issues of labor markets, issues of inequality, among other things. And I've been the faculty director of the Inclusive Economy Lab for now what would be 7 years? 8? Are you having 8? He's got 8 fingers up. I can't believe that. I think he's wrong. When we started the Inclusive Economy Lab, the thing that really appealed to me is the idea of not just doing research for the sake of research and publishing papers, but really trying to leverage this research for impact and change and impact at scale. And the little story that we're going to tell you over the next 2 panels to conclude your day is, still my favorite examples of how I think this model of doing research, of building these partnerships with the nonprofits, with government entities, educational institutions, for the long term, kind of really, has the promise of achieving impact. So I'll stop there and I'll introduce our panelists, and I'm going to take my glasses off so that I can read and not make any mistake. Aneesh Sohoni is the CEO of 1 Million Degrees. Kelly Hallberg, my colleague at the Inclusive Economy Lab, where she's the research director and has been one of the lead PI on the study we're going to talk about. Veronica Herrero, who I've known for those 7 years, was at OMD and is now Chief of Staff and Strategy at the City Colleges of Chicago. And finally, Joanna Trotter, who is the Executive Director for Global Philanthropy at JP Morgan Chase. So thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. And I guess I would like to start with you, Aneesh. Kind of what is 1 million degree? Can you just take a few minutes to explain us kind of what the model is and what it all encompasses?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you hear me? Perfect. So look, 1 million degrees, our mission is to support community college students on their pathway to economic mobility. In terms of kind of our size and scope, we were founded in 2006. Beth mentioned a little bit about how many students we were serving in 2013, a little over 100. And currently, we serve nearly 900 students, primarily in the Chicagoland area, with aspirations, which we'll talk more about, to serve more than 3,000 students with the City Colleges of Chicago in the coming years as well, which we're incredibly excited about. In terms of our model, there's really 4 key components to it. First, we provide personal support for our students, we call them scholars, to really help them navigate life. Second, we provide academic support to really make sure our students are successful in their education. Third is professional support, and this is maybe a lesser known part of what 1 Million Degrees does, but really ensuring our students can see the connection between the education they're pursuing and the career aspirations they have, whether that be directly going into the workforce or transferring to a 4-year institution as the next step. And then finally, financial support. And we do this through essentially a performance-based stipend of up to $1,000 that students can earn as a reward for our students on making progress against key milestones on their journey in our program. And this last piece is critical because oftentimes students can drop out or stop their education because of lack of financial availability for immediate needs. And so we don't have any restrictions on that stipend. Students are able to use it as they need to progress in their journey. Last thing I'll note is kind of how we do all of this, right? So first is really through relationships. Each of our students is paired with one of our team members, a program coordinator, where they get case management support to really navigate what life might throw at them, ensure they can get referred to incredible services like the wellness centers that we've heard about today. Second is curriculum, really supporting students in navigating their own personal identity and getting ready for career. And then finally is that accountability piece, right? And we don't use accountability in a punitive way. What we mean by that is really supporting students to making progress alongside the key milestones that'll help them and support them in their own journeys as well.
Great. By the way, there's going to be room for questions. So if you have questions, use your cards, raise your hand, and I'll make sure to make time before the end to answer or address those. So I remember Paige kind of was probably at one of the first meetings I had when we started IEL, and Paige reached out at the time, in your role, and had some interests in trying to understand, as rigorously as possible, the impact that 1 Million Degrees was having on its participants. And that started a very long kind of partnership relationships. And now we have results. And Kelly, who's been really the lead PI on this work, if you do not mind coming and kind of telling us kind of what we've learned and how we've learned it.
Yeah, happy to share this. And I think there should be some slides because I'm a researcher, so I don't get too far away from my charts. But a little bit of background. When we had that initial conversation with 1 Million Degrees, I think we were excited about the study for a couple reasons. One, at the time, and this was now almost 7 years ago, time flies, there was a nascent literature at the time that was starting to show that the holistic kinds of supports that Aneesh describes are really what was needed to move the needle for students. There had been some research of sort of one-off interventions, just address the financial struggles that students are having, just try to address the academic challenges that students are having. And those kinds of interventions weren't moving the needle in the way that we hoped or needed to reach the equity outcomes that we hoped for. But there was this emerging body of literature that was showing that these holistic programs might really be the thing that could move the needle. And so we were excited about that because, as much as we want to follow where the data shows, it's always exciting to find something that does move the needle for students. And the second thing we were excited about is that because of 1 Million Degrees willingness, but also because of the way their model was structured, we were able to generate really rigorous evidence. So 1 Million Degrees at the time, and the recruitment efforts helped this, had way more applicants who wanted to be in the program than could every year. And that gave us an opportunity to structure this as a randomized control trial, which basically means we held a lottery. So the students applied to the program. They were screened for the typical eligibility requirements for the program. They sent the full list over to our team, and we randomly selected who would get an offer in the program and who wouldn't. And this was, both a fair way to allocate this limited resource of spots in the 1 Million Degrees program, but it also allowed us to generate really rigorous evidence about the effectiveness of the program. And now, if my charts come up, I can share with you that evidence. So the first thing that I think wasn't as big of a surprise, but that we were excited to see, was that the program moved. There are no slides.
Yet. So
It's
you may want
okay.
to wait.
And if the slides don't come up, I can tell you in words what you could also see in pictures. If the slides join us, there should be like 2 red bars, but yeah, I do know them by heart. So if the slides may join us, but if not, I can sort of share the results. So the first thing that wasn't a surprise is the program moved all 3 indicators that we were looking at. So we found that the program affected enrollment in post-secondary institutions. That's enrollment in any post-secondary institution, whether it's city colleges or a 4-year institution, sort of across the board, we saw enrollment move. The second outcome that we looked at was persistence. So it's good enough that we get students in the door, but we want them to stay and have the supports they need to stay. And we saw that the program moved persistence. And then the final outcome that we learned a few years later was that it also moved degree attainment. And so those were, that was what we hoped for when we started the study, and is incredibly exciting. There were a couple surprises that I think popped out for us. One was actually that enrollment finding. So 1 Million Degrees has always thought of itself as a college support program, not a college access program. But we were actually seeing that the program was moving the needle in terms of students enrolling in college in the first place. And that was a bit of a surprise, and it made us think about what parts of the model were moving that enrollment piece and not just helping students stick around. And then the second piece that was a little bit of a surprise was who the program was most effective for. And that was students who applied to 1 Million Degrees before they'd even stepped on campus at city colleges. So most of these students were applying during their senior year of high school when they were figuring out what was next for them in their college or career process. And that offer of a spot in the 1 Million Degrees program close to doubled their enrollment in post-secondary, their persistence, and ultimately, we learned a few years later, their degree attainment. And I think that wasn't necessarily, I think if you would have asked Paige or Veronica at the time, the group that we thought that we would have the biggest impacts for.
Thank you. Thanks, Kelly, for summarizing that. Now, Veronica, from your perspective of your role here at City Colleges, you receive this research. Kind of how do you make use of it, or how helpful is it, if at all, in thinking about I'm guessing the key kind of mission that you have, which is trying to close a bunch of equity gaps in terms of college access, enrollment, and then more broadly, kind of trying to improve economic mobility in our city.
I'll start by saying that it was absolutely helpful because I really do believe that, and I'll tell you why, but I'm also scared of getting tomatoes thrown at me because there's a bunch of teammates out there who worked their butts off on the RCT, so I'll say it wasn't in vain. It was the RCT, and RCTs are hard. They're really hard on organizations, but at the end of the day, so absolutely worth it. I mean, you have to have the right case and the right conditions for it, without a doubt. But it's just paid dividends in many different ways. So at city colleges, we do have a very clear North Star, and that's equity. And it's equity in all outcomes, but specifically, we're aiming towards equity in completion outcomes. And across all demographics. Our goal is to achieve a very ambitious goal of a 55% completion rate. And I say across all demographics because we're not just talking about an average. We're talking about getting all of our Black students to 55%, all of our Latinx students to 55%, everybody to 55%. And where we have the greatest opportunity is with our Black students who are currently at about a 29% completion rate, and then followed by our Latinx students who are at about a 32% completion rate. And we knowing those gaps, right? We owe it to our students to figure out what works, and once we figure out what works, we have to scale it. And we always knew that OMD had a great impact on the students they served, right? We knew that, and we knew it in our hearts, and we could see it, and we could hear it in their stories. But the RCT gave us that evidence to say, yes, it works. And it doesn't just work, right? Look at these outcomes, which are just phenomenal. And it really pushed city colleges including myself, right, as part of city colleges, to say, we need to figure out how to do this at scale. So we're doing it for the students, and we believe that this is going to be a really critical element of our strategy, our equity strategies. From an access standpoint, the findings of the RCT have been rolling out. The first set were the access, which is we just heard. It was a surprise to us that we had such an impact that OMD, so we, sometimes depending on what statement I'm saying and what period of time, might be me at OMD, as in we at OMD, or we at city colleges. But so when I was at OMD, we did not expect to see these kinds of outcomes on access and enrollment. But when I first started here, they had just come out, and we very quickly started to put that data, that finding into use. We refined our post-secondary navigator role to reflect what we knew was, part of what was feeding into these enrollment outcomes at 1 million degrees. And for those who don't know, our post-secondary navigators are staff members that we have at our CPS high schools that help our high school seniors to navigate the enrollment process and really explore what the different options are at city colleges. So we refined that role as soon as we learned that it was a really strong enrollment strategy. But sort of fast forward, what we're doing now is, we have to make this program available to all students who are eligible for the program. So therefore now we've embarked on this 4-year scale, sort of a ramp-up period where we'll be working very closely with Aneesh and his team to integrate OMD with city colleges and make sure we are giving them access. And we're going to give all of the eligible students access by, we are integrating. We have already, as you'll hear from my colleague, President Hollingsworth, in just a bit, but we're merging or integrating the application and onboarding processes so students don't have to take extra steps to be part of OMD. And we're calling it an opt-out model, right? And there's a lot behind that, but it just basically means you are automatically in once you apply for city colleges and you are eligible. On the retention side, the one thing we've learned at city colleges as we've been really looking at our data with the completion rates is we lose about half of our students new students, before they get to their second fall with us. So if we're losing half of our students in the first year, there's no way we can achieve the outcomes or the completion outcomes that we desire. So we are really focused on first year experience, and the 1 million degrees model is going to be part of that first year experience for our students. And finally, on the workforce side, we're waiting for, we're very eager, right? Because part of this work is learning. We're going to learn over 4 years, but we're still waiting on the workforce outcomes of the RCT. So I think once we have that information, that will then again be another part of this partnership where we're integrating efforts for our students.
When are those going to be coming, Kelly?
We're hoping to have, it'll be about 1.5 years from now that we'll have our first workforce outcomes. Takes a little bit more time.
So keeping on my march on trying to understand how, kind of research can impact things. Joanna, you present the perspective of a founder here. And my question to you is, kind of how does, having access to research, kind of impact, funding decisions, whether it is private funder like yours or, maybe somebody else can talk about it more like public, kind of public funding allocation decision.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. And I'm gonna start with the personal first, because so much of what we're talking about today resonates from a personal perspective. I'm a first generation college student, and the seed was planted for me not by my parents, who I love dearly, but did not quite have the tools to coach me through the college process. But it started in 4th grade, where I had a principal who made an announcement that there would be a scholarship for any of us to go to college if we maintain a certain GPA. There was a couple criteria. And from 4th grade on, that was in my head. And sadly, in junior year, I go to access my scholarship. It has become insolvent. But what it meant for me is that was still my path, no matter what, right? I knew that was the light at the end of the tunnel. So, master's degree on, it was that 4th grade experience. And what resonates is the earlier you start. and not just promise that college is available, but that there are tools to support you in college. So that's really important. And I was chuckling that the way that I scraped it together and went to a state college, so not community college, but very similar experience where I went part-time, but I was an insurance agent. So going back to the past panel, I was like, it's a great career path and it helps you through college, I found. So it feels so long ago and a very different life for me, but definitely resonates. So I come from a perspective of, I'm gonna represent kind of two funders, and I'm gonna look for Laura Pruitt, who was on a panel earlier, because she was my partner in crime while I was at the Chicago Community Trust, really co-designing a strategy around middle skill supports. And I'll tell you how we landed on that strategy, and Laura, raise your hand if I'm saying anything wrong. But both my role at JP Morgan Chase and my role at the Trust came from a perspective of not a traditional sort of education funder. The Trust was looking at the wealth gap. So we made a 10-year commitment, and this is, I left a year and a half ago, so I'm gonna be really careful that this is my hat while I was at the Trust, but it was a 10-year commitment to addressing the racial wealth gap in the Chicago area. And so it was really hard because the research we were finding was college is great, but the data shows that even for a head of household, a black head of household, who has a 4-year degree, their wealth is less than a high school educated white head of household. So for us, it was we have to really interrogate the 4-year pathway as just the silver, well, I hate using this term, as the sure thing to start to close the gap. And so working with Laura, we really started to interrogate that because Kinship, which we were a co-funder with and co-managed funds at the Trust, was an education funder. And so how do we marry these two, what seemed maybe contradictory at the time, and really landed on the importance of community college as a safe way for young people to explore what they want to do without being extremely burdened with debt, and making sure that they complete and go on in pathways that make sense and are worth the degree that they earned. And so that was really important for us. And so logically, what that then led us to is supporting OMD. OMD was such a critical partner to city colleges at the time and continues to be, and it was a natural fit. So that's one piece of all of the work that we did together, but just want to acknowledge Laura's leadership in that work. And then fast forward, now I'm at JP Morgan Chase, and we're a career funder. One of 4 areas that we focus on are careers and skills. And for that same reason, we have really partnered with OMD for several years. First on how do we support work-based learning? And so that, again, led us to city colleges as a core partner, and then OMD's model as a way to ensure that we are supporting apprenticeships, ways to do work-based learning. So I'll just quickly name 4 exciting ways that I think we're partnering with OMD. And I will go back to the randomized control trial because for us, as a non-education funder, having that evidence of we're not only sort of going out of our comfort zone, working with a college and post-secondary institution, but we need the evidence behind to know that this works. So the one thing, so we start out with the apprenticeship work and work-based learning. I would say more recently, and I will call out my colleagues at the Fellowship Initiative at Chase. We have, for over 13 years, worked with young men of color and are now launching a young women of color effort for young women 18 to 24. And OMD was the first partner. So Chicago is the first market where we're doing this work with. So while we're a funder, we're also, I think, a core partner of OMD in terms of utilizing their expertise in this work. We had the pleasure of supporting Westside United as they really scaled their work on the West Side. Part of that was small business development work. Part of it was careers and skills in the medical industry. And that work was in partnership with OMD and Malcolm X College, where we are today. And the last thing I'll say is that we're just super excited to be one of the funders as we think about this opt-out model, because when we think about this opportunity going to scale, and that's really where we come in at JP Morgan Chase, is our efforts are really about how do we innovate and bring efforts to scale. So this is a perfect example, and I'm not gonna take Aneesh's thunder, but I wanna make sure that we're just speaking about why this is so critical, that we can really touch as many students as possible. So I'm not gonna, maybe we'll come back to the different components of OMD's model, but I just wanted to say that I think beyond education, I think this particular pathway in terms of getting folks to and through, both as a way to bridge to four-year, but also bridge to career. This is an amazing model to follow.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, Aneesh. And again, same theme, just trying to understand kind of how research kind of, impacts, decision, not, taking your perspective. I believe you arrived at OMD, a few weeks after the results on graduation kind of came out. That's kind of, I would think that most CEOs of nonprofits don't have the luxury of having, evidence on, kind of the impact of the model that they're running. How did that change how you think about your role, kind of, or as you kind of thought about, kind of your role going forward, kind of how have the findings kind of impacted your decision or your vision for the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. It was actually on my second day, I think,
Okay.
on the job. So I share that context to say, like, there's so much gratitude I have for Paige and everyone who's been working, who here on the next panel, and everyone who's been at OMD for a while, because it is a big risk to take to say, we're going to open up the data, come study us. So what if it doesn't work, right? And if it doesn't work, you got to figure out how to do it, improve it. But it's a huge risk to take. The good news is we're always learning and improving, but you heard the outcomes. There was really positive evidence. So knowing that, I was deeply excited. One, Veronica mentioned this. The only way you can scale up programs is to partner with the colleges, right? And I think if you're a public institution, if you're a college, I don't want to speak for you, you can jump in here too, but like you can't invest at scale unless you have the evidence to show that it works, right? You want to invest in things that work. And so that data was critical, I think, to us sitting down over lunch and saying, hey, what do you want to do now, right? What's the next step now that we have this data and conversations I think you all were having? The second piece, the thing that kept bugging me when I started my job, and I try to spend as much time with scholars and alums as possible, and I kept hearing stories of how people found out about 1 million degrees and applied for the program. Saw a bowl of oranges and they were hungry. They were never intending to apply for OMD, but they wanted food, right? And as a result, they applied for OMD, and then the story. Last night at dinner, there's a colleague here from the Inclusive Economy Lab who was a City College student, Elijah, and Elijah didn't do OMD, but I asked why not. Turns out he didn't need it. He went to Cornell, was working for IEL, he's doing great. But the response was like, I didn't know how to find it. Like I had heard about it, I had some friends doing it, but I didn't know how to find it. And so one of the big questions for me was like, how can we lower the burden of luck and chance in giving students things that work that they deserve? And so a critical component that you're hearing on the panel is all students will have access to it and have the opportunity to do the program unless they choose to opt out. But I think you can only make that choice if you have the evidence that it works as well.
This is great. I have to remind you that if you have questions, it's going to be up to your questions soon. So please write it down and pass it on to me. So I think my last, my last question is just going back to the model that you described at the very beginning. I think OMD is very much a wraparound program that addresses multiple needs that we think students might have. One of the limitations of doing a randomized control trial like we did is that you can evaluate the box, but you can't really get inside the box. So we have, based on the results of the research, kind of really no clue about which component of OMD is the most important one, whether they are all important, whether they are really kind of complementing each other, or whether one could pick one or two of the components, reduce the cost of the program by a lot, and be able to serve even more students. So the question is to all of you, do you have a clue, kind of what is your sense? What is your sense of what is the recipe? Is it really about all of the facets of the program, or do you think there are really some, particular component that, absent that one, we would not observe the result that we do? Obviously, this is a critical kind of question when one thinks about scaling the program and also kind of like the cost-benefit aspect of these things. So in whichever order, I think all of you, kind of have most likely a perspective on this question. And I don't think you coordinated, so if you come up with very different answers, it means that we don't know.
I can
Veronica
take a
is going to
shot
go
at it.
first.
We chose at City Colleges not to pick one. because we didn't think it could be done with just one piece. And I think having been in it and now scaling it, I'd say being in it, I bet every one of those elements will work well in isolation. But will they work in the same way? I don't believe so. I think the connectedness of this is very critical. That's part of my theory, is just they don't exist in isolation. It is referred, it's when you need it, it's presented to you, you're navigated through every decision you make or that you need help with, right? And then the other part of that theory is the community that is created through that connected system and that connected network, and that it just gives the sense to the student of, I really belong. Like, I belong, and I know I've got a whole team of people who believe in me, who see me, who will, challenge me and give me that high five when I need it most, right? And I think that that sense of belonging and community is, I think, it's the whole, right? And that's my theory. And what I'm really excited about is that City Colleges also is a community of people who care for those students. So I cannot wait, right, to see these teams come together and really, like, now we're talking a completely connected system, a community for our students. So I believe that our outcomes will be even stronger over time.
Yeah. And we did not coordinate, but I would say that my theory of the case is very similar, sort of based on two things. First, sort of the read of the broader literature outside of the study that we did. So there have been studies of individual components, and they can move the needle. But the places where you see the kinds of impacts that we've seen from 1 million degrees are these comprehensive programs that touch every aspect of students' lives. And then the other reason why this would be my hypothesis is we didn't just crunch the data. We also conducted a bunch of focus groups with scholars, with program coordinators, with coaches who work in the 1 million degrees program. And I could give you $1 for every focus group that we sat down in, and we heard the same thing. I came for the finances, so like that was important. I came for the money because I could get up to $1,000, and like that means real things in people's lives. But I stayed for the community. I stayed for the supports. I stayed for my coach who was in my corner, and I just don't think you can both hook students and get them into the program and give them the supports they need if you're picking and choosing the components of the program.
Yeah, just to echo that, and I'll add maybe one other piece. I mean, everything you just heard from Veronica and Kelly, like the word that comes to mind for me is hope. That our students are looking for hope and connection to their future dreams and aspirations. And if I were to summarize kind of why I think it works, I think it's the community and the relationships really create hope, or at least help our students tap into that hope that's possible. I'm going to also take this question in a different route. So I think your question was, what does a program work? I think an equally important question is, why does the partnership work? Because this doesn't work without the partnership, right? Ultimately, we exist to serve, we're in service of the City Colleges of Chicago. And I think it's important to remind ourselves of that every single day. And your racial equity goals. And there's, this leadership. You've heard the Chancellor's leadership, you've heard Veronica's and the Provost. Leadership at the president level, right? You're gonna hear from President Hollingsworth in a little bit. The leadership below the president at every campus, right? It is a true collaboration. It's going to be a true integration as we move forward as well. And I think that's critical. The other piece for us, we are only as successful as is all the efforts you heard today that City Colleges is taking on in their learning agenda, right? We may be able to support students in accessing and tapping into all of that, but it's very appealing to us to work for an institution that has institution that has a comprehensive plan for how it's going to support students through its entire journey, knowing that we can be one part of that puzzle as well. So I think that's also why it works.
Yeah, I'll just, I think I'll just come back to the idea of a community of support. Because I think it is a particularly unique scenario with a community college student who's often doing everything they need to do to support their family, to work while going to school, and that like trying to also have that sense of connection at your educational institution is probably that much harder. And so I would just reemphasize that I agree it's probably hard to pull apart any of these pieces. And then I will also say at our next panel, we have a City College graduate, and I think we should make sure we ask her that question as well.
Great. So I received a lot of, kind of great questions. Some of them, I don't think we have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try to be deliberate here. I think some of them might be very good for the second panel, so I'm going to put them on the side there for the next moderator. The first question I want to go through is, I guess maybe to you, Kelly, but also to, the partner or, Paige or at the time is, if you had to kind of redo this, the whole evaluation process, would you do it differently? And the question as a second part, which is 7 years is a long time to learn about whether or not something is effective. As you said, Kelly, it might be another 2 years before we have early results on, kind of ultimately the thing that we are trying to change, right? Graduation is all fine, but we want people to have good job, good career, kind of we want to move those things. So is 7 years just too long to wait, to wait for results? And you have 3 minutes and a half.
All right. Great questions. I think to the first one, I think the core of what we did and the evidence that we produced, I, stand absolutely behind and would do it all over again, because I think that, the evidence that we've generated has really moved the needle, and I think like it's been really exciting to be a part of this process from the beginning and to see the way that both the organization and city colleges have used the data and evidence to make change. And so, that I wouldn't do anything differently, because I've been really proud of the work that our team has done. I think we did do focus groups and talk to students and coaches and gather that data along the way. I think I would have been maybe even more intentional about observing the core components of the program to gather that information about exactly the question that you were asking, Marianne, about sort of what is the secret sauce, because I think as we've gotten to the scaling piece, it's not going to be scaled in exactly the same way that it was implemented at a much smaller scale and in a different way. And so, I'm sort of hungry now for more evidence about what was it about the way that they were doing the work at that time. So I think I would have even doubled down on getting better implementation data if I could go back in time. But that, of course, is with the hindsight that I now know the effectiveness of the program. So, hindsight's 20/20. In terms of the length of time,
and it's also complicated because I think implementation data, costs money.
It does.
One has to also think about, getting research like that started and, kind of suppose you learn something worked, you would have liked to have more money to study implementation, but it's difficult to get everything to align right.
Yeah. And I know now that it would be worth the investment because we know the outcomes,
Exactly.
But we didn't know that then, so, I don't know. I think in terms of the time frame, I am as impatient as the next person about how long this work takes. I think one of the ways that we have tried to address this and did in this study is build in sort of those interim outcomes of success. So it did not take us, 6-7 years to get to the point where we knew the program was successful. We looked, at early cohort outcomes to look at those enrollment and persistence findings. That started these conversations about how can we take that so that this was all germinating, so that then when you had the graduation outcomes, you could really be ready to move with them.
I mean, it is a long time. It is a long time. And you heard me, I'm very eager to see our workforce outcomes, and I know that's going to even be really difficult to get to. But I think it also takes systems a long time to implement and change, right? So you release the enrollment information, and then like you said, it's like you plant the seed, you start, the system starts to listen and think about well, what does this mean for us? And then you set out another wave of findings, and then so you're kind of almost at the same pace of change when you're thinking about real systems change. Systems change doesn't happen in a year or two, right? It takes years. I mean, achieving the dream will tell you it takes 10 years, right? So I would love to see it quicker, but I know how, how hard it is, and having been there at the beginning, it takes a lot of time to just even get it started. So these things take a long time. It's science.
All right, there's a bunch of questions for you and Aneesh, which I would summarize with like, people are trying to understand how OMD differs from other programs out there. You know, I have one in mind. You may have more. Kind of, can you just give us a sense of like, is OMD kind of really distinctive from some of the other programs that have been serving similar populations, or how do you answer that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'll answer it in a few ways. So first, I think a core component to why we've been able to be successful was we started here with the City Colleges of Chicago in 2006. And it's been an iterative process, right, to add more students to the student that we work with, add more colleges within the city colleges that we work with. And so I don't know that this is distinct about the program model, but I think the lesson to take away is this is very localized work. I think we've learned time and time again, as organizations have sought to replicate to other geographies, it's really hard to replicate context and relationships, right? And so I think that's what might make us unique in this specific case. A few other things to note. I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of college access and success programs out there. Very few focus exclusively on community college students. And so the population of students we work with is really important to us for all the reasons that have already been mentioned. Second, it's really important to us to have that career connection piece as well. There are a lot of organizations that focus on access and success, but everything we do, while it's primarily during the student's experience at community college, is about success in that period and preparing them as a bridge to the next step they're going to take. I think that makes us unique. And then the program I think you're probably thinking about is ASAP out of CUNY, another great program, right? They were built within the CUNY system, and we're a nonprofit. It comes with its sets of benefits and challenges, right? But one of the things we're trying to carry forward is this idea of integration. How can we learn from other partners? And one of the things we learned from ASAP is because they were integrated within the system, there are benefits like access to student data to really be able to think about how can we provide real-time supports for students, or collaboration between teams that we think are really powerful. And the last piece I'll note, without getting into too much detail on this, is we're a relatively cost-effective program compared to some of the other ones. There's actually a pathway to a sustainable investment to keep this thing going over time. And that was, we try to keep an eye on how much this costs while also serving students.
This is great. Next question is for you as well. I have a few more minutes, I've been told. I think you Aneesh, used the word our students. So I think people were wondering kind of what do you mean by our? And I think maybe one way to think about this is like what makes a student eligible for the program? I think that's how I understood the question. Sorry if that was the wrong interpretation.
Sure. Well, I'll answer it in two ways. Like,
Yep.
we say our students because they are our students, right? They are not OMD students. They're not, I mean, they are CCC students, absolutely, but like, we are in it together. So that's why I intentionally try to use the word our, because that is what we mean. In terms of the eligibility, right? So there was a lot of conversation about who should we start with in this integration and scale up. And look, in the ideal world, you offer it to every single student and see what happens. We live in a world, at least initially, of some constrained resources. And so we had to be thoughtful about what did the research show, who could we impact, and how close did we want to stay to that model. There's a few things, I'm not going to talk through every eligibility criteria, but maybe a few things worth noting. So first is we are working with students who, they don't have to be full-time, but they should demonstrate that they're on track to graduate within 3 years. Right? There's a lot of research around momentum. And the model that was research of ours was more parallel to that piece around ensuring students are kind of continuing. By the way, if you're taking less than the 9 credit or so requirement that we have, it's not that we're going to say no to you. We hope our program is an incentive, if it makes sense for the scholar, to actually take one more class, enroll one more class, to know it comes with a set of supports, financial resources as well. And then the second piece on the eligibility front that I think is important is thinking through the new and re-enrolling student piece, right? So Kelly mentioned that one of the surprising effects was those who applied to 1 million degrees before they actually entered city colleges was where you saw the greatest outcomes. And so we're taking a focus. We're going to work with one college area. We started Olive Harvey, which you'll hear about in a second. And we're going to add all new and re-enrolling students at every college that we add so that we can focus on the population where we think we're most likely to have impact. That wrap up now sign has been up for 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Go
Can I
ahead,
add
Jonah.
just
You can
one
have the last
point?
word.
I would be remiss not to say this as the philanthropist on the stage, is that as we think about scale, I would say that I won't call the financial supports the most important, but I think the role of philanthropy in supporting those financial supports, because I think that's the hardest money to come by. So I would just encourage all of us in philanthropy that we get real creative on how we make sure that that stays intact.
Great.
I'll be following up with you, Joanna.
And I can attest to how hard it is for my institution. But anyway.
All of the remaining questions, which are carefully put over there, are about scaling, which means that you are done with us and you are ready for the next panel. So thank you so much for your attention.